All right, chapter 29. We're going to talk about Haydn in this chapter and chamber music. All right, so there were some expanding musical ideas. The theme was the musical idea, the building block of a piece. So if you think about larger works that are longer in composition, sometimes 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, you need to have something that ties this longer piece together. It's much different than a 2 or 3 minute radio song like we're used to. And so you need to have a theme that helps to connect the piece. And what that theme does is it goes through something called a thematic transformation or thematic development. And that's accomplished in a variety of ways, but you'd have the melodic outline, and then you could vary it either rhythmically or harmonically. You might have an extension of the melody, a contraction, a repetition, a little portion of the melody, the smallest portion called a motive, would be just a little fragment of the theme you might use interchangeably or bring that back intermittently. You might use sequence, which is just repeating the melody or the theme at a higher or lower level. It's referred to as sequence. But in these larger forms, what this thematic development did was help to form clarity, coherence, and logic within the piece. So it really was the glue that held the piece together. We're going to talk about Haydn in a minute, but this was the place where he worked. This is a modern day picture of the Esterhazy Palace, but this is the place where Haydn was employed. Quite a substantial place to work. And so you can imagine the type of entertaining a place like this might have had and the musical demands on the court musician at a place like this. Classical forms were very specific. And so we're going to take a look at some forms with this unit pretty closely. Form was very important because it helped to organize the piece of music. It was called absolute music, so there's no prescribed story or text, which is different than what we talked about with program music. Okay, but the form gave recognizable structure to the piece, and that really helps the listener to clue in. Because if you have this piece of music that may be 20 minutes long, you're going to imagine losing interest some. And so when you have these unifying elements, recognizable structures, it gives the audience a way to kind of know what to expect, and they begin to anticipate because they have grown to learn these structures. There's larger forms, and then there's internal forms or smaller forms. Those smaller forms binded together the sections into a larger piece. And so the larger pieces we're going to be looking at are called multi-movement cycles. All right, so they have more than one movement. There's sections within a greater piece or a bigger piece. They're separated, and they're considered, you don't really play them by themselves, but they do have a beginning and an end, each section. Kind of like chapters in a book, if you want to think about it like this. The typical format right here is going to be in this box where you've got first movement, second movement, and then if it's a 3 movement piece, 3 movements only. Fourth movement you would have would be the last one. So that third movement is the optional one. If you had a 3 movement piece, you wouldn't have that third one. Does that make sense? So the first movement would be an allegro tempo, a little more dramatic. You're going to hear that main theme. The second movement would typically be a slow movement in contrast to the first. In a 3 movement piece, we're going to skip that third. In a 3 movement piece, we'd have a lively, spirited, allegro, or vivace, which is even faster, tempo, really upbeat to close it out. And if it was a 4 movement piece, before that last one, you'd have a dance-like one, which would have maybe a minuet and a trio, a scherzo, one of the famous dances that he kind of pulled in and continued from the Baroque era. So that's the basic general scheme of a multi-movement cycle. Each of those movements had prescribed forms and tempos. We just talked about the tempos, the allegro, the adagio, the allegretto, or the vivace, which all had to do with how fast or how slow the movement was. But typically you had fast, then slow, then dance, then fast. That was kind of the easy way to put that. This would apply to all sorts of different instrumental works, symphonies, sonatas, concertos, string quartets. Lots of different movements, but we're going to look at what we call chamber music, which is a little bit different than orchestral music. So think about chamber music as in a smaller room, not a large concert hall, but perhaps a chapel in the Esterhazy Palace, something smaller, more private. Maybe anywhere from 3 to 9 to 12 musicians is kind of where that would settle. So the fourth movement, the rondo, would be a very common movement in chamber music, a very common form, I should say. The rondo is light, it's lively, it's upbeat, and it has that recurring refrain. If we remember having that refrain in some of the other pieces we looked at, that kind of recurring main theme. We referred to that as the chorus when we were talking about that in another composition. And then contrasting episodes, which are just alternating contrasting sections of music. Ternary form is the ABA form, and rondo is expanded ternary form. So you still have that ABA, but then you throw in that C, which is just an extra little alternate section, and then you go back and repeat that A to tie it all up. So A is the repeated connecting element throughout the piece. You have an A section, contrasting section B, then you bring in that A section again, contrasting C, and then close with that well-known A by now. All right, so 2 to 10 players is what this says. It's kind of a range, 2 to 10, 3 to 12, somewhere in that range for one player per part for chamber music. So it's a smaller ensemble, more intimate, and the players really functioned as a team. This was the band, and every player was important. It wasn't just about one person and then the other people backing them up. This was each person having equal participation. Think about it like conversations without words. They used predictable musical forms, and everyone came to know the string quartet, which was the most important chamber music genre during this time period. The string quartet is made up of 4 strings. You could guess that. Violin 1, violin 2, a viola, and a cello. So 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. It was said that the string quartet would embody the composer's private thoughts, be a little bit more intimate. And cultivated music lovers really enjoyed this. You might hear this at a very formal wedding, perhaps, or see a string quartet playing at a mall in the holidays. So you may have seen this even contemporary, but it was very popular during this time period. Other favorite compositions, combinations would have been the sonata, duo sonata, or a piano trio, or a quintet. All of those are considered chamber music. Here's a picture of a performance of chamber music, giving you an idea. Smaller venue, some audience, but not huge audience. They're all sitting together, kind of looking at each other as they exchange music in that conversation. The piece I want you to listen to is called Haydn's Joke Quartet. Joseph Haydn was a famous composer, started out as a choir boy in St. Stephen's in Vienna, and then he worked at the Esterhazys, that was the palace I showed you, under that patronage system, and he was employed by them for 30 years. Long-time employee there, born in Austria, and he directed orchestra there. He was the head of the opera company. They even had a marionette theater. That's that puppets on strings, and a chapel. So he would have done music for all sorts of those things. He had a successful group of trips to London, and that was important in his compositional output. Remember, composers were able to travel a little bit more now, and so that exposed them to different styles and therefore also took their music to the different areas where they went. And so some of his compositions really had an importance in developing orchestra and particularly the string quartet. There's a picture of him. His style was very logical, varied movements, expressive harmony. He put out a ton of symphonies, over 100, and 68 string quartets. Symphonies are 4 movement pieces, 20 to 30 minutes long each. So if you think about that, that's like somebody writing the orchestral music to 100 movies. It's quite a lot. 14 operas, keyboard music, as well as concertos. Opus 33 quartets were a set of 6 quartets that were dedicated to the Grand Duke Paul, which was the son of Catherine the Great. And in this, he did something different. He put a scherzo instead of a minuet, which is a different dance, which would have really kind of shocked the audience at first because remember, they became very used to these forms. So they were very used to the minuet style. So when they had this scherzo in place, kind of woke them up a little, brought the interest along. And so in this joke quartet, you'll have to find the joke, but it was named after the 4th movement. So I want you to see if you can find the joke in that. First violin's going to lead the conversation. There's a humorous coda, a little bit of a playful treatment of this, and the refrain, which is that A section, is going to be established. And then you're going to hear this rounded binary form. So you hear the A section repeated, and then contrasting B section with A tagged on, and that's repeated. Okay, so you've got 2 A's and then 2 BA's, which is kind of a expanded binary form. All right, so the string quartet in E flat major is where this is coming from. It's the 4th movement. It's a presto tempo rondo form. A, B, A, C, A is the form with a coda at the end. All right, so I want you to follow along with the listening guide here. Take a listen to this and see what you think. See if you can hear that presto tempo. See if you can find those A sections and B sections where they change. And see if you can find what the joke is. The coda is that closing little piece of music tagged at the end. So you may just find the surprising ending there.